August 24th, 2020, Montgomery County Council meeting, and we're also going to be sitting as the Board of Health during parts of this time. And as we begin, we're going to ask Madam Clerk, do we have any changes to our agenda?
Good morning. No, there are no changes today. Thank you.
Well, we know this is a special meeting because that's the only time that's ever happened since I've been president, that there's been no changes to the agenda. Okay. And with that, we have an introduction for a Board of Health regulation to adopt Executive Order 098-20, COVID-19, local order amending and restating order dated August 5th, 2020. And Mr. Drummer, do you have anything to add to that statement?
No.
That's fine. And with that, we're going to go into, we're sitting as the Board of Health. We're going to have a public hearing on, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is a public hearing on Board of Health regulation to adopt Executive Order 098-20, COVID-19 Local Order Phase 2, amending and restating order dated August 5th, 2020. Action is scheduled immediately following this hearing. Each individual will have 2 minutes to speak. Individuals will be alerted as they approach their 2 minutes and may be disconnected. Also, there may be technical glitches during the public hearing that may need to be addressed by our staff, so thanks in advance for your patience. And Ms. Kennedy, it is my understanding that we have speakers for this public hearing, and if you would be so kind to introduce that.
That is correct. I see one of the people who has signed up who is here, and that is John Sahakian. Mr. Sahakian, you can unmute and begin your testimony.
You want me to go first?
Yes, you're the only one there, okay. So go ahead, sir.
All right. Thanks, guys, for having me. I was on the call actually with you guys 2.5 weeks ago, and I just found out about this meeting last night, so sorry for the late sign up. I figured I'd at least be on the call because to kind of follow up on things I brought up, and I'm not going to rehash them, but I own Quincy's, some of the Quincy's bars and restaurants. So obviously, I don't know how this meeting's working as far as amendments. I know last week, 2.5 weeks ago, you guys' hands were tied and you had to vote yay or nay, and I totally appreciate you guys having another meeting. So I thought I'd just give you feedback real quick what the last 2.5 weeks have looked like from us. At a 10 p.m. last call type of thing has definitely affected business. I think all the restaurateurs I've talked to, it's pretty much a 10 o'clock closing time for the most part. And so it's frustrating from a revenue side, but also for our employees. They're definitely taking a financial impact on that. So I did even a social experiment. I got the UFC fight last weekend just to see what would happen. Normally, the main card starts at 10, ends by midnight or something. By 10:30, we were empty. So it definitely had the impact. I don't know if that was Dr. Gale's intent, but it definitely had that impact on us. Again, I would love to be reassessed and maybe a change to midnight, some kind of compromise. And from your guys' side, maybe having more of an enforcement type of thing if someone's not doing it the right way, to enforce them however that happens to be, shutting down, taking liquor license, because it's obviously affecting the rest of us that feel that we're doing it the right way. The last thing I'll just say again is, for us, I would love the data to be looked at the right way, and I feel like the last call I was on, they just talked about positive tests, but I've never heard anything about our positivity rate. And obviously, if you double testing, the number of positive tests will go up. Obviously, we hit, I think, an all-time low yesterday, 2.1% through the average. So I guess that's my point, is I feel like we've been in a good place for a long time, and it just seemed a kind of an unwarranted thing to do. I'm okay with a compromise from the restaurant perspective.
Mr. Sahakian,
2 hours would make a big difference. 2 hours for us would make a big difference.
Excuse me, your time is up. Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, guys. I appreciate your time.
Mr. President, that is all I see for folks who are here to testify.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're going to close the public hearing now, and we're going to have a vote as a Board of Health at the end of this meeting. The next item that we have is an introduction And the action item, and so I'm going to need a motion in a moment, for a resolution to approve Executive Order 098-20 COVID-19, Local Order Phase 2, amending and restating order dated August 5th, 2020, as the County Council. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Been moved by
Second.
Councilmember Reed, seconded by Councilmember Rice. I see no speakers.
Mr. Council President, question.
Yes.
I think these are all the same essential topics. When would you like to, when should we have dialogue? Is it at the...
Right now.
Right now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm glad that we're taking this up. I appreciate some of the updates in the new order. For example, the regulation around the facial covering, ensuring that you can't have your nose, protruding. That's an important small correction. I'm particularly pleased to see that we are allowing soccer as a recreational sport. On August 4th, we met and we had dialogue with the executive branch about the need to revisit that.
good.
And Michelle Parsons, I think you're not on mute. We had dialogue about the need to allow soccer, and particularly in light of the fact that the schools are closed, and there really are so few opportunities for children to get outdoor time, to get social time, to get recreational activity in. Now, this is an appropriate measure to take. I think when you look at the big picture of all the health protections that we are maintaining in our consistent low rates of transmission, relatively speaking, that I think this is an acceptable, loosening, and it's going to make a big difference. My main concern is it may be too late. The recreational soccer leagues have hundreds or thousands of kids, and trying to get a season in before it is unplayable due to fall hours is going to be really difficult. And I think we need to have a quicker system for the regulations. There are many different provisions of this regulation that are not necessarily related. I'm sure some of them have been ready at different times. And I think going forward, we should have the ability to move more quickly, take up smaller pieces, and perhaps just have a regular tweaking process so that when something is timely, that we are able to act on it in a timely manner. It's 20 days now since we had the conversation, and I know that many of the leagues are going to find that it is really difficult, if not impossible, to fulfill what they had been asking for. But all the same, it's a good step forward. I did want to comment on the swimming. I know we've received a lot of inquiries about swimming, and my understanding from Dr. Earl Stoddard, our emergency director, is that swim teams or pools can be in touch with him directly to devise plans that may allow them to do lap swimming. So there isn't an order at this time that is a general opening up of swimming, but for those who want to do more swimming, your club or your pool can be in touch directly. Potomac Swim Club has done that. So I know that that's been a major question for a lot of our residents, is how to do more swimming. So I'm pleased to support this regulation, and I'm glad it's before us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Stoddard, would you like to comment, please, about the swimming? Or Dr. Gales, whoever would like to comment.
Yes, it took me a second to start my video. Sure. So, as Councilmember Reamer said, we're not going to give a blanket increase to lane swimming because we think there's a safe way that lane swimming can be expanded, but it really needs to be in the context of a broader plan. So the largest association of competitive swimming organizations, Potomac Valley Swimming, did submit a relatively robust, well, I say relatively, a robust strategy for safety that allowed them to do supervised increased swimming. So they will have someone who's outside of the pool overseeing the increased use of a lane, and staggered starting and stopping times and locations that we believed was safe enough to allow for an additional number of swimmers in a lane. And so we'd be happy to consider other organizations submitting similar types of plans and strategies. It's not a blanket exception to the lap swimming rule, because obviously that can be very problematic if you have multiple people in a lane and you're not doing the other things of supervision, direct supervision of the people in the pool, in the lane, as well as the staggered starting and stop times. You can submit essentially requests for an exemption like that through our covid.plans at montgomerycountymd.gov. We will consider those. Obviously, having to go through them, it does, take us a little time to go through them, but we're happy to look at things like that where there are safe opportunities to allow certain activities to proceed.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. I will try to be as brief as I can. There's construction outside of my window, so hopefully it's not too loud. First of all,
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, and you're welcome for that. The construction crew, I think, was sent here by the Council President. A couple things. One, a couple comments. I share the comments that were made by Councilmember Reamer about the fact that I think we got to a good place here of a reasonable approach to safely allow for soccer to take place, to be in conformity with the state, which seems to make a lot of sense. Regret the fact that it took as long as it did to get to this place, which I think put a lot of families in the county in a tough spot and many organizations in a tough spot. But glad that we did get here, and do appreciate the fact that the executive branch took the time to listen and take to heart some of the issues that were raised by many of the folks who reached out to all of our offices. Related to that, competitive swimming as well, I hope that we can get to a similar place. I hope we can do it quickly. Do we have a time of when the process for letter of approvals will be formally allowed? Is that allowed right now? Will that be allowed later today? Is that later this week? What's the timing for that? What can we share with folks who have reached out?
So the Potomac Valley Swimming approval will come today. We were almost ready to issue it on Friday. We had some back and forth on some final details about exactly what the extent of the approval is going to be. It'll come out today. The website or the email address to submit plans is live and has been live for a couple weeks now, and people have been submitting various other plans. So the covid.plans at montgomerycountymd.gov is sort of our one-stop location for people requesting. And to be clear, we grant less than 10% of the waivers that are requested. It's not a sort of a blanket approval. If you have a plan, there are certain activities that we're still not allowing writ large. And for example, we've gotten theaters that have asked for exemptions, and we can't even allow them because of the state.
So I mean, I think it's great for Potomac Valley. There's a lot of other folks who've reached out, a lot of other organizations who have reached out. Is it possible, one, to share publicly what Potomac Valley is doing that is allowing them to safely reopen? Is that able to be shared publicly with our offices on the website?
We could check with them to see whether I don't know if there's anything proprietary about their plan. I don't think it is. It's based on the USA swimming guidelines largely, but we can verify with them that we're able to share it publicly or with other teams and have them replicate what Potomac Valley has done. But if they do replicate what Potomac Valley has done, we will grant them the letter of approval. We've already discussed that. So
okay, I think it would be helpful to start with, here's what, if you do this, you will get approved, as demonstrated by one organization that has already done that. Allow them to move a lot quicker, because time is a challenge for a lot of these organizations, for a lot of these families. On August 3rd, I sent a letter related to schools and the decision where there's been a lot of back and forth on the schools. I wanted to get an idea of whether or not that letter was going to be responded to and what the timing to expect when that letter would be responded to. It was sent to Dr. Gales, copied a number of executive branch members.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you all this morning. To address your question, Councilmember Friedson, as you know, the order was rescinded. However, despite that, the lawsuit against me and the county has not been dismissed, and therefore I'm unable to comment on that letter at this time. And second to the question related to and I know County Attorney Kent is with us, and if there are further questions, I'm sure she'd be happy to address those. But also wanted to comment on the piece related to some of the articles that we've been reviewing and looking at. And I just want to emphasize this for the folks at home, understanding that we are working to get as much information as we can to inform those processes to be able to provide that guidance. And there are instances such, for example, when we're talking about soccer, where there are differing opinions. And so while the state has approved it as a medium contact, there are other organizations such as the NCAA that still have it listed as a high contact area. So I give that as an example to say it's not an effort that we are trying to take long. We're trying to make sure that we have comprehensive information to be able to inform those processes. Thank you.
Andrew, was that everything?
I'm disappointed that a letter can't be responded to. I don't think it was related specifically to the lawsuit, but can follow up on that. Definitely it's disappointing to hear.
I would say, Councilmember, I think County Attorney Kent could further comment if you've got further questions or disappointments with it.
Okay, I'll follow up on that. Thank you. Similarly to that, there's a lot of confusion of what the county is waiting for from the state, where things stand at the state. I think there's been some conflicting information, on both sides of, where things are and, what the status of things would be. A lot of schools had intended to open or are planning to open imminently. Just wanted to get a sense from you and Dr. Stoddard, Dr. Gales, of where things are. What's the current status of the independent schools and county guidance? Are we waiting for the state to issue guidance? What specifically are we waiting for from the state? And do we have a sense of specific timing that residents and schools and families can expect?
Sure, I'd be happy to start, and Dr. Stoddard or Sylvia, feel free to chime in with additions. So as you're aware of, we met with independent schools the last week of July to provide technical assistance. And as you're also aware of in the process and being briefed related to the directive that we put forward, and I'm sure you're aware of the steps and processes that have happened since then. When the governor asked us to rescind our order or put in an executive order, the state promised that they would be providing guidelines to provide for the local jurisdictions in terms of what schools needed to do. I think it was framed of as long as schools are consistent with CDC and state guidelines, they would be able to reopen. We don't have any state guidelines. I asked in early August, and the health officers have asked repeatedly for that guideline, that set of guidelines from the state and the State Department of Health and the governor's office. And as of August 24th, we've not received those guidelines. And so at this point, we're waiting to get that guidance from the state to help frame the process moving forward. In terms of what state guidelines will be put into place in terms of the expectations and the requirements of schools to follow in terms of reopening. And we look forward to receiving those and being able to provide assistance to the different schools. Now, separate from that, we have set up a series of webinars starting this Friday, which we will offer technical assistance, particularly related to larger questions that schools may have, for example, contact tracing 101. What are the steps involved in that? And as one of the big issues that came up last week, as you may be aware of, there was a school that had some cases of COVID that necessitated a follow-up investigation. And there was some confusion in terms of what the statutory requirements are for schools and entities to report that information to the local health department. And so we are looking forward to those opportunities for continued conversations to provide further guidance to make sure that the schools are aware of those types of requirements and different things in terms of reporting, as well as to facilitate the conversation around reopening.
I would only add that obviously in one of the original governor's tweets related to the order that Travis had previously issued, the state did promise to have guidelines. We have not seen those guidelines. I think it's been alluded to that I believe the Maryland State Department of Education has a meeting today that they may follow this week. And so we continue to be hopeful that they're going to produce them. But obviously, as Dr. Gill said, we're scheduling a meeting for Friday at 1:30 to begin to go over some of what we do know in terms of local reporting. That's already in state law. And so we know that we have to move forward. We understand that schools are being put in a very difficult position of not having guidelines for which to follow. We wish those guidelines were available. We don't want to issue our own guidelines separate from the state, not wanting to be discongruent with what we know the state is about to do. And so, hopefully the state will issue its guidelines, and we're going to move forward with what we can with the schools as quickly as we can, as early as Friday. And hopefully those 2 days can line up well.
So last question related to that. What are they expected to follow currently? There just seems to be a lot of confusion. I sense your frustration of not knowing from the state. There seems to be fingers pointing in opposite directions of the county can move forward. We're waiting for the state to issue guidelines. What are the schools expected to be operating under currently, and how is the county health department going to determine whether or not they're following rules if the rules haven't been established?
An excellent question. Right? We don't know what we don't. I don't want to preempt Dr. Dales here. We don't know what we're even going to be permitted to enforce at this point. We're hoping that the guidelines will help us to better understand as well. There are some basic rules that we know that we can enforce that are pre-exist beyond COVID that are sort of related to what the private school issue was last week with the few cases we saw. But we're hopeful that the guidelines will explain a fair bit about what the expectations of the local health departments and local enforcement would be as well.
And I think to add to that, part of the challenge is that there are no clear markers in terms of measures when it's safe to reopen. I think if we look at the landscape of information across the country in the last week, there's varying opinions on that. For example, the threshold in Georgia is different from the threshold in Connecticut, which is different from the threshold in New York, which is different from the threshold in Pennsylvania. And the challenge is we have asked the state again to provide guidance on that, because when we attempted to have input in that conversation and discussion, we were not allowed to. Our directive was rescinded. And so in the absence of that, we are asking the state, again, and this is 3 weeks after the first request, to provide such guidance. And if there is not going to be guidance in a particular area, that what spaces will the local jurisdiction have in that conversation, as well as what roles will we be able to play and allowed to play with the different executive orders and so forth to comment on execution of that. Now, for those of you watching at home, again, if you are aware of instances where you feel that there is lack of compliance in a particular area, and lack of compliance means lack of adherence to the general rules that we put into place in terms of wearing face coverings, honoring and respecting physical distancing and having those things in place. If you see instances where you feel that that is not being done, we do have a mechanism within which you can send in your complaint to the county, and we would investigate that process consistent with if it was another businesses or another business type that was not adhering to the rules and regulations that have been put into place.
Can't I don't have any further questions, but none that could be answered at this time, so I will yield back, Mr. President. Thank you.
Much, Vice President Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, everybody. Thanks to Dr. Gales and Stoddard and the county exec staff and everybody who worked on this. I think it's a very appropriate update to the executive order from August 5th. And thanks for responding to the suggestions many of us had regarding some of the concerns from our small business owners and other constituents. I hope we can return soon to the 10 p.m. rule in the restaurants and tweak that. I know that we weren't able to do that in time for this, but I'm looking forward to ongoing discussions with that. One quick question about the bowling alleys. Thanks for including them. It was described last week in our call as the intention enacting the same restrictions as DC and Prince George's does. My understanding from my constituent is that DC and Prince George's have the 50% restriction of capacity, but don't have the total cap on the total number of customers at 50. And I understand also Baltimore is a cap of 70 customers. And so I just wanted to verify that that variance from DC and Prince George's is actually intentional and that our requirements will remain more restrictive than DC and Prince George's.
Prince George's County does not have the cap of 50. DC does.
Okay.
So we base ours around what DC has done because obviously it's always easier to become less restrictive once you see good positive results than it is to go backwards. And so I think we'd like to assess the 50, and then we can revisit that at a later point.
It's a great start. Thank you. I just wanted to confirm that difference from last week's discussion, and I appreciate the all the work that went into this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Alvernon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much, Dr. Stoddard and Dr. Gales. And thank you to the staff to put this together so quickly. I think that, this continues to be a moving target. It's extraordinarily challenging. And for those organizations who have expressed some frustration that they weren't included in this particular order, I think context is important. And so I just want to let those organizations know that our public health officials and our emergency management team are reviewing these diligently on a case-by-case basis. And they are taking in a number of factors into account, including what other local jurisdictions are doing, because those weekly meetings that we have with our neighboring jurisdictions provide a wealth of information that is critical in that decision making. In addition, we look at peer-reviewed studies. We look at analysis from across the country. And so there is a high level of depth that goes into each one of these decisions. And that level of depth, we all have to understand, includes everything under the sun right now. And so the bandwidth is obviously challenging in the midst of everything else that's happening. So I'm personally familiar with the level of analysis because my office has been in contact with our public health officials and our emergency management team on a regular basis. And I do feel very confident and comfortable that we are doing everything within reason to assess on a case-by-case basis. And we'll make adjustments as evidenced by this morning. Having said that, I have found as a best practice in instances of other industries where, and I'm speaking on behalf of our public health officials and emergency management team, they have always said from the very beginning, more information is greatly appreciated. And our various sectors, and I'll start with aquatics as an example, have provided information and videos from USA Swimming that I know Dr. Stoddard has found very helpful. And so to the various sectors that are out there who understandably are anxious and want to be able to carry out their various programs or services safely, I would encourage you, as you provide information, to provide as much specificity as you can, because I think that this morning is evidence that all of that is very much taken into account. I'll stop there to see if you guys want. I have a few other questions, or comments, but if you guys could add anything to that, I would appreciate it. Just again to provide some context to those organizations on how these decisions are made and the level of depth that goes into that process.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember. again, for the folks watching at home, we do review a copious amount of documents. None of the decisions that are made are arbitrary or just pulled from a subjective nature. We look at best practices. We look at lots of data sources. We actually have a team here, members on our staff. Part of their job is to scan the literature on a daily basis and provide updates to new technologies and new issues. We review surveillance data from a local level, a state level, and a national level. And we also, similar to the example of soccer, part of the reason that there was confusion around that was because all of the different governing bodies did not agree. And so in doing our due diligence to research that, we made sure we had as much information as possible because there was not a consensus. And to your point, in this time, we've never lived through COVID before. So there are many instances where there aren't consensuses related to practices. And so we do our best to do our full due diligence to get as much information as we can to be able to comment and provide guidance on those areas. And I think this creates a natural tension because from a health perspective, sometimes that can seem to run counter to economics. But from our perspective, we only operate from here's what is safe to do. Here's what we have information that is safe to do. Here's what we have. And to your point, if there is more documentation that groups have to support that information and drive that conversation, please feel free to send in those documents. But again, I just want to reiterate and emphasize for the folks at home is that is what guides our decisions. That's what guides the guidance that we offer related to all of these different issues.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And to follow up on Councilmember Friedson's questions, which I appreciated, and I'm not going to repeat, but I just do want to underscore that it is critically important for us to receive this information from the state as quickly as possible because, the guidance on opening is one thing, but if there's an outbreak in a school, do you close just the classroom and the students that were in that particular class? Do you close an entire school? Like, what's the threshold and what are the benchmarks? Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's exactly the kind of guidance we're hoping to receive from the state. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And again, given how different rules have changed, what discretion will the local jurisdictions have in terms of being able to inform that process? And when the state has promised to provide that, and so I know us and 23 other jurisdictions are eagerly awaiting to get that information to open. But to your point, if things do open, what happens and what are our benchmarks and threshold measures when they do and something happens in the future?
And I would just add, there's at least like half a dozen different variants of the question you asked, meaning what happens when a student develops sickness in the classroom and is sent home, does not have a COVID test, what do you do? A parent calls in and says, my child has tested positive for COVID, what do you do? And so like all of these different variants have to be spelled out in strategies, and the state guidelines as it relates to what the requirement to do in each of those areas is going to be paramount in determining exactly what is, what we're enforcing in a lot of cases.
Thank you. And then my final point is I think all of us are particularly concerned about health and wellness right now and the emotional wellness of our students, many of which, obviously, most of which are not going to be able to go to the classroom in person. So recreational activities that are safe, that are outdoors, that provide social distancing opportunities are critically important right now for those students to be able to participate in some activity, to be able to cope with and process everything that's going on right now. So I think the measures that we are taking today are important, and the ones we will take moving forward are also important, bearing in mind safety is obviously our number one concern, but recognizing some of the side effects of all of this extraordinarily challenging time that in particular our children and youth are facing right now. So again, appreciate these efforts and look forward to the ongoing dialogue and discussion moving forward.
And I just have one thing, Council President Katz. I just wanted to emphasize and remind those schools and entities in their places, if they do have cases, they are required by state law to report those cases to the health department. We do have contact tracing tools and teams in place to be able to help guide that investigation and be able to provide guidance. And one other point I want to emphasize is I am aware that different groups have their own kind of contact tracing networks and teams within their entities. But it's important for folks to understand is that the official folks who coordinate and provide the guidance related to contact investigations are the local and state health departments. And so it's important when you're notified of cases to notify us as soon as possible so that we can start that process and be able to provide you the official formal guidance that you will need moving forward.
This is an area there is no daylight between us and the state on. The state has been very supportive of these efforts in contact tracing at the local and state level.
Thank you. Councilmember Ahmed Osmond, have you finished or?
I did. I just had one other point. The tennis folks have been reaching out also, just, some of the requirements, just again, to let folks know that we're going to review these on a case-by-case basis. Today is evidence that, yes, you will be heard, and understandably from your perspective, and any additional information we can provide. There's going to be a lot of examples like this. So I appreciate the nimbleness of the council and looking at these respective issues in the administration as well. And that's another example of one we'll be looking at too. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Drummer, did you have a comment?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to point out what the executive order changes are summarized on page 2 in the packet. When the packet went out on Friday, it had the executive order before it was signed. I know everybody, all the council members received the actual signed order over the weekend. I just wanted to point out the signed order actually has an effective date that's not in the packet, and the effective date would be today at 5 p.m. for the action. So I just wanted to, that would be the executive order you'd be voting on. The signed.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and I'm going to try and be quick. It's very interesting because I was in a different state for about a week and got a chance to see up front what it is that they're doing in responding to COVID, a state that has roughly about the same population as we do, but much significantly larger land mass. So folks are spread out a little bit more. Things are situated a little bit differently, but it is interesting to see their approach when it comes to what it is that they're doing via restrictions. And I will just say this, one of the interesting things that a lot of folks had been talking about, and I actually talked to some of the elected officials there in Colorado, that I noticed that we don't distinguish with our masks is the type of mask. And there's been a lot of studies that have recently come out, again, not I don't think to the point where we have CDC guidance or FDA guidance, anything along those lines, but that are talking about the actual effectiveness of bandanas and neck gaiters versus actual cotton masks. And I was just wondering if, because we are now requiring and putting more stringent restrictions in terms of saying that a mask has to be properly worn, have we given thought to saying what type of mask should be worn? Understanding that neck gaiters, bandanas do not significantly limit the risk of transmission as an N95 mask, or even some of the quasi-95 masks, the KN95s and all of those, as well as the cotton mask. So I'd like to ask Dr. Gales or Dr. Stoddard that question first.
I think that's entirely possible. We can continue to look at ways to integrate that new information and educate the general public on that.
Dr. Gales will tell you he's a graduate of the great Duke University, and they did one of the major studies around the types of masks.
The only study on that type of mask.
And so we certainly are aware of that study and are looking for additional. I mean, typically, and this goes back to what Councilmember Albernow says, we're constantly reviewing information. We're looking for where there's cases where there's multiple studies done by different locations that find the same results, and we can take actionable information off those. We're very aware of the studies out there that also say 6 feet is may not be enough distance between people. We're of those studies as well. And so, that's the benefit. Dr. Gales is a pediatrician. I have a doctorate in molecular biology. I'm not sure how many counties have the benefit of having both a scientist and a pediatrician. And we're trying to, review the information with our respective teams to understand exactly. And once we believe that there's enough evidence to say, not only there isn't a issue here, but what is the remedy for the issue that is reasonable, that's when we take action on things. So I think it's very likely we would take additional action in the future on face coverings and providing different additional guidance as we see enough evidence to say not just this is better, but or not, there's an issue, but also what the fix is.
So from my perspective, the question is that, especially since we're now going towards more relaxed, I think that it's important for us to also make sure that we're protecting folks as well, right? So, and I don't have an issue with us going in this direction. I think it's good for us, but at the same time, also educating people about the best things that are out there. And certainly we know that while it's one university that's done the study, it is also indicative that there are a lot of folks who've talked about this for a very long time. A lot of doctors, a lot of folks who have said, look, these neck gaiters, these bandanas really aren't very effective. And so much so that airlines do not allow them. And so that says something to where I'm not even talking about being as stringent right now as saying, because I certainly support looking at the evidence and getting some more studies underneath our belt, but even just putting a recommendation out there and suggesting to folks that, hey, yes, there are options, but you really should, to be on the safe side, wear a cotton mask or wear an N95 or KN95 mask. One of those certainly provides more protection. We do know that that's true, and so why would we not have that as guidance to our constituency, understanding that we're moving towards this more relaxed sort of state?
So I would actually highlight one thing you did say, which is that, for example, N95s are a really good example. Yes, N95s are likely the most protective mask you can wear, but they're also the masks that we typically focus on our healthcare providers because they do procedures that are much more at risk. So I would not want to put out, even though we believe N95s is the most protective mask you can wear, the difference between an N95 and a polypropylene layered cloth mask or a surgical mask for the average person is probably not enough to warrant the risk associated with taking them away from the healthcare sector. And so that's an example of where, we're trying to balance a couple different things here, which is availability of the resources such that you're not creating a massive equity issue where you're saying, everyone who goes to this mask is safer, therefore, but also that, that mask is necessary for healthcare settings. And so we'll continue to take a look at what you've described, Councilmember Rice. I think we're on the same page in terms of agreeing that there are some differences out there. It's just how exactly we modify and what the implications of that are for our community and the availability of those resources are. And so, for example, when we are ordering cloth masks now as a county that we will then distribute to the public, we're focusing on acquiring the resources that have been demonstrated to be more effective. So we are doing what we agree with you to do. It's just making sure that we have enough of those resources to provide to the public before we come out and say you should wear this kind of mask or not this kind of mask. Because, in most cases, wearing a mask of any kind is going to be better, even if it's not 100% better than wearing nothing at all. And that's important.
Excellent. And then my last question dovetails into schools a bit, and I know that this is not a part of the executive order itself, but it is an interesting question I have to where, again, with the mask policy, because I'm just curious if we have the ability within schools to require that folks wear a mask in a school building.
Yes. So
public and private is my public and private.
So this is, again, one of the items that we have pushed the state to include in the guidelines to address, to be able to enforce. And again, the expectation is that separate from guidance for schools that is absent at this point, that is a requirement for the county and the state that you wear face coverings in indoor settings and outdoor settings as well, where physical distancing is not able to be achieved. So the expectation is, even in the absence of guidance related to schools, is that something that should be followed. And again, if there are instances where folks have noticed that that is not being followed, or there are concerns about that, please let us know and we will follow up accordingly.
And then my last question just dovetails into sports. There was a soccer tournament that was in Fort Collins, and so they had a lot of children that were in the hotel that we were staying at who were soccer players. And I will just say that, again, as folks want to relax the restrictions and allow for kids to be kids and be active and all of those kinds of things, I just will tell you firsthand from just watching the children and their behaviors, they didn't do any of the things that we wanted them to do. It's very difficult. They must have had about 75 kids in the pool. They had a little small pool that's an indoor pool, but even outside of the pool, all of the things that we had talked about before when it comes to lap swimming, the congregating, as they play together and sit together as they're huddled on the side at the edge of the pool. So they're outside of the pool, but their feet are in and they're all lined up together, 20 of them in a row, side by side. And these are children from different families, so obviously interacting. Those are the kinds of things that happen at pools too, right? Because that's what it is. Pools are a social interaction point. And so from that perspective, I just want folks to understand that that's the reason why there's this sort of concern that's there. As a parent, right? As a parent who sat there and looked at this, and the exercise facility overlooks the pool. So while I'm there, in the gym, I'm watching this entire thing play out and just thinking to myself about how, again, the risk just continues to exacerbate. And these are kids from all across Colorado who came together, right, as a part of this team. So, again, those are the heightened risks that are there. I know that folks want to get back to normal. But, again, those are the concerns that I think folks have about what happens when you have this sort of loosening of restrictions. And so while I do appreciate and want, folks to be able to swim and do all the fun activities that are out there, at the same time, I just want to let you know I personally saw it, the level of risk that's associated with young people around that age who, these are like 10, 12, in that age group, who just aren't following any of the guidelines and restrictions when it comes to this. And so there is still, I think, a continued need for caution, and especially at that age group.
I would only add that that actually is what gave us much of the pause around soccer is not exclusively what happens on an individual field with an individual game, but rather, my daughter has done soccer in Montgomery County. You come to a high school field. There may be 8 games being played simultaneously with all the, the children associated with that, the parents interacting. In between games, they're going over and seeing their friends that they haven't seen from school. I mean, this applies to other youth sports as well, so it's not just soccer, but that actually is what gave us the most pause about soccer, just because of how popular a sport it is in Montgomery County, the number of students or young people who play it. And certainly, I think the biggest thing in all of this conversation about reopening that we need to keep in mind is that we're about to go into the fall. I think there's another area of uncertainty about what's going to happen to us in the fall and the winter. I think everyone wants that January timeframe for Montgomery County Public Schools to be, okay, we're going back to school. We control that. We play a huge role as the collective we, not local officials, elected officials. The people of Montgomery County determine whether it's going to be safe for schools to go back in January. And the way we operate and choose to, do things as individuals influences that collective decision. I think you've already seen over the last weekend, Dr. Fauci started talking, hey, maybe more realistically, a vaccine is like fall 2021. And I don't want to say that to people and like have them be terrified, but that's a possibility that's on the table. I don't know, I think end of the year was always a very wishful thinking kind of thing. And so if we want schools to go back, if we want to be able to get back to a normal operating society, absent a vaccine, and even with a vaccine, we're going to have to take the things and, take things seriously in other ways and make choices now that determine our future. We wish this were a national choice and we were all making it together, and that would much more greatly expedite how to get there. Right. But we still have a responsibility locally to do what we can do to keep the numbers low, to give us a chance at a normal school day, a normal whatever in the spring. Or at some point in the fall or whenever it is. But these are all choices that we make. The more we open now when our cases are moderate, I would call them, maybe a little higher than moderate, but the more choices we make now, that has effects down the road, and we can't have our cake and eat it too in all cases.
And the other thing to emphasize from a data perspective is that we have seen a trend over the last 6 weeks in the state of Maryland and our local jurisdiction where a higher percentage of new cases are in younger people. We can't ignore that. So even if the overall numbers are improving to some degree and test positivity is improving, we also have to make sure that we're looking at the complete picture of data. And so we're actually actively working to break down test positivity by age groups. And for example, over the weekend, there was one day where 21% of new cases were ages 0 to 19. This morning, it's over 18%. And so that's different from where we were historically, and that is a function of, one, more kids are being tested, and more cases are showing up in that age group. So, again, we have to be mindful of all of those factors, as Dr. Stoddard mentioned. We continue to look at the full spectrum of data and information to guide the decisions as we move forward.
Thank
you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to everybody. Swimming. Let's start with swimming. So many of the outdoor pools close in the fall. Well, how do you see that interacting with indoor pools, or maybe I missed something in the order, or are you going to reevaluate? What's the thinking on that impending shift?
As far as the timing of the school, so right now indoor swimming can generally operate following similar guidelines to what outdoor swimming can. We're not looking to make a global change in the way swimming is done. What we've essentially done is just made some exceptions for competitive swimming that is directly supervised, and I think that's what we're looking to have happen. Now, and this is the reason why we didn't do it is because, you wouldn't necessarily have at a recreational pool someone in a lap lane. If you have multiple people in a lap lane, there's no one there directly supervising those 2, 3, 4 people swimming in a lane. They likely are not, if they're lap swimming, they're likely not, they may not know each other. They may not have any way of having coordinated who starts where and who stops where. And so it was done as a more nuanced and regulated exception as opposed to a blanket exception where there's a lot more risk associated with it. These are athletes who, at the level that they're swimming at in these competitive settings have been doing so for a number of years typically, and are more accustomed to specific start times, operating on a whistle, all of those things. And so the circumstances were a bit different. Not to say that we would always decline a recreational request. If someone came forward and said, hey, we would be willing to put a monitor at our lap lanes to monitor the swimming, we would consider that. I think it's the rules that we're considering, not the venue.
Sure.
And so.
So you don't see that the changing of outdoor to primarily indoor in the fall changes the regulation or the rules of considerations at all?
No, other than the fact that right now, even the governor's order still requires that I believe shower rooms associated with fitness facilities would have to stay closed. It's possible that gets alleviated with phase 3, which, by the way, I don't want to make. We're certainly not looking at phase 3 as a county, but we've received some inkling that the state may be. Yeah, we're not looking to move forward to phase 3, but I think that the state may start to have that conversation, and so.
Well, that's part of my question. I just think we've always had this issue of being on a different timeline, and I think rightly so, been more cautious, and that's led to us being in a better situation. Obviously, there's a communications issue when we take some action and the state takes a different action or lack of action, and then how we communicate it. So that's why that was something, the indoor-outdoor thing is something I just flag it as an issue as we head into, we might want to just reissue or be very clear when we get to the fall, assuming we're still in phase 2. So that'd be, I guess, a suggestion. Related to the schools, I'm as you are, I'm extremely frustrated with how this has played out and for the private and non-parochial schools. A couple of questions on and I know you have the lawsuit, but on the bullous outbreak or the bullous cases, I won't say it's an outbreak, but bullous cases, has there been, you were not notified directly by the school, or were you?
So we were notified on Wednesday. The cases were first reported to the school on Monday. In my understanding, there was information sent to parents on Monday and follow up, but we were not notified until late Wednesday morning.
Are there any specific guidelines other than that? Obviously, state and local health officials need to be notified. I'm assuming it would be immediately, but is there a timeline associated with any current statute or regulation?
So you're correct. The expectation is we should be notified immediately, as soon as everything.
The law says immediately. The law says immediately.
All right, that's what I thought. Have there been? Do we have that situation under control? Are you guys doing your contact tracing? Is that in a place where you now have a handle on that process for that particular incident?
Yes, we do.
Have there been other incidents that have been reported from private or non-parochial schools?
We've not had any instance where there's been a positive case reported. We have received some complaints about concerns around behavior at some of the schools in terms of adhering to the guidelines that we put forward in terms of face coverings and physical distancing, and the team is following up appropriately.
Have you all reviewed plans of schools and approved or denied or provided comment on any parochial private school plans?
So no, to date we have not. We received, as of last week, we had only received, I think, actually 4 formal proposals and requests, and I think there may have been some that have come through over the weekend. This actually speaks in large part to the guidelines that we are waiting for from the state, particularly as it relates to not only what the provisions are for folks to follow, but if there is a statutory requirement and expectation of the health departments to perform and execute that responsibility in terms of approving a plan and so forth. And so that's, again, part of what we're waiting to get clarification from in terms of what those expectations are. And certainly we want to make sure that we have a clear playbook to follow by to make sure that the process is as objective as possible.
So basically, from what you're telling me right now, we're just flying blind, and schools are doing whatever they think is best, hopefully in accordance to CDC guidelines, but there is no regulation or approval of plans. And do you even have a sense of how many schools intend to open? Are you even tracking that?
We are, as best as we can. We do know that there are a number of schools who have communicated and said, based upon the guidance, we are not opening before October 1st. There's some who made that decision. And we continue to find out kind of piecemeal. Unfortunately, we're trying to get a sense. We've met with the Association of Independent Schools to get an accurate calendar, if you will, in terms of what the reopening schedules are. But, we do find out each day that, school X has opened or they're planning to open within the next several days.
Okay. Well, I share your concern with and urging for the state to come out with guidance and processes to how to react. I also think on our part, and I know you all have done this, we need to double down on the communication to the institutions that the law states immediately, and that needs to happen, and that matters as far as when and if they occur. But I'm extremely frustrated. I don't know how you do your job, how we do our job as the Board of Health, when you have no guidance, no information, no authority. And I just think it's an absolutely ridiculous proposition that with all the action that was taken and all the outrage by the governor and the back and forth of the orders, and now it's rescinded, you got what you want, and then there's no guidance. So I'm extremely frustrated with that. And so we'll continue to try to support and push, and please, hopefully you get that information. And I think our part, all we can do at this point is try to just make sure that schools know, administrators know, parents know, you have to immediately report these. We shouldn't be finding out on social media, so that you all can do your job and try to contain things as quickly as possible. So you go ahead, Dr. Gibbs.
I just was going to add one more thing to that, and I appreciate those comments, is the CDC actually updated their guidelines this past Friday. So to the earlier conversation, there are updates and nuances as they come forward. And it's important to emphasize that the comments that they made and they put into their updated guidelines are that basically schools can reopen with plans if you have effective control over viral transmission in your community. And that goes back to what we've been saying all along, is that we promote developing reopening plans that do take into consideration all of these different precautions. But the key factor is they're only effective if you're opening up in a community where there's low community transmission. And that was confirmed with the updated guidelines from the CDC and the comments made from members of the COVID task force over the weekend. I think there's going to be lots of discussion about what constitutes low community transmission. There is no agreement on this, and to Dr. Stotter's point earlier, there is no national strategy or national set of baselines. We've got lots of states and municipalities doing it differently, and I'm hopeful that, again, for the sake of standardization, we'll be able to have, again, some better guidelines in terms of what those measures and metrics are, so that we actually have something that we can point to. To go back to what we talked about a month ago now, is we were looking at how one measures low community transmission and moderate transmission. We shared with the community what the CDC definition was and how we calculated that for our local jurisdiction. And so, again, there's lots of variability within that space, but hopefully there will be a national conversation about what truly constitutes low community transmission, which the new CDC guidelines are based upon in terms of saying that for reopening plans to be successful, it must be done in this setting of lower community transmission.
Right. And that's obviously context specific. The last thing I have question is related, it was mentioned briefly earlier about the restaurants and the change to 10 p.m. Are you seeing in our overall, obviously many of us have shared concern. You heard the one person testifying today about impacts on restaurants and businesses. Obviously safety is most important. Have you seen that have an impact positive or positively over the last couple of weeks? I know that it's not a one-to-one, but based on where our overall numbers are now that we're several weeks out, have you seen anything that you can provide any comment on that?
Well, I think from the numbers perspective, we have seen the numbers trend downward slightly. We've seen some improvements in terms of the daily averages related to that. And I know that Dr. Stoddard has been a part of the enforcement process and can comment more related to that.
Yeah, I think first off, our community baseline has gone from averaging about 85 to probably around, I had to calculate the average for probably in the 60s over the last 2 weeks or so. We've also had teams out doing enforcement the last 2 weekends, and we have had no citations, no closures. Yes, that is because I think we agree that it is definitely having an impact on the businesses, but it is also having an impact on those two things are related, right? Less people in the restaurants and bars, less transmission, less violations. So, this is definitely an area that we struggle with a lot. And like, to be truly clear, like, you think we've been thinking hard about soccer. The impact on our restaurants, we think about that just as much or more, because frankly, that's such a large number of people and that's their livelihoods impacted. Like, we get that. We get that a lot. And, if we could figure out some mechanism that allowed for the same public health protections without the business impact, I think we'd be happy to consider it. The problem is that the typical thing that we get is do more enforcement. But frankly, the thing we struggle with in the enforcement piece is this. In every single location that we go, not every single location, if we went in and did zero tolerance enforcement, we would be closing probably like 50% of the places we go. And what I mean by that is like you're having transient violation, like someone going over to another table for a few minutes. And do those few minutes matter? They matter in the context of doing it 1,000 times across all of our restaurants on a given Friday or Saturday night. Should we be closing a restaurant because a single customer went over and violated the rules? Even though that does matter, if the restaurant goes over and enforces it 3, 4, 5 minutes later, that's the hard part. So if we were doing zero tolerance enforcement, we'd be closing a lot of restaurants, issuing a lot of citations, pulling a lot of liquor licenses. That's the hard balance that we find ourselves struggling with.
Well, I would just say, and I appreciate you saying that it's a tough call. This is something where 60, 90 minutes make a big deal, a big difference, right? And as the numbers continue to improve, 10 is a lot different from 11 or 11:30. And I think we all agree there shouldn't be we shouldn't have 2 a.m. going on, right, or 1 a.m. But I would just say I'm glad we're heading in the right direction, and just keep looking at it. And I think it's something that I know we all hear about a lot. So and as always, thank you.
I know the county executive has a meeting also with some of the restaurant groups this week as well. So this is a conversation we're going to have multiple times, and we're happy to have it through council members organizing. We had it with our restaurant group, our recovery team last week. Like we want to keep having these conversations. If nothing else, hearing from we have to continue to remind ourselves of the economic impact that we are having through these discussions. So that has to be important to balance.
Thank you for all the work that you all do. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to need to reopen the public hearing. It's my understanding that we do have a person who was not able to get in, and she is here now. So we're reopening the public hearing as a sitting as the Board of Health. Ms. Kennedy, could you please admit the person? Excuse me, Mr. Reamer, what?
I was in the line to speak. Are you coming back?
You are, and okay. We will get back to the line as soon as we admit this person. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Melissa Schweisguth is on the line, and Melissa, you can begin your testimony.
Hi. So I just want to make sure that Councilmember Reamer, your comment was not a continuation of the dialogue that was just happening.
It is, but we'll come back to you. We'll come back to it. Thank you, Melissa.
Okay.
Glad you're here.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, thank you. I wasn't in the meeting. I was on hold for a long time listening to 4 measures of music. So my name is Melissa Schweisguth. I live in District 5, Silver Spring. Do I need to provide any more information?
Nope, that's fine. That's
okay. So, and I'm a social scientist, trained scientist, but also have been making masks since mid-April. Have made about 841 to date, and really follow the science. And I really appreciate Councilmember Rice bringing up the science and the recent articles, recent research in light of the masking language in the revised order. And I appreciate Dr. Stoddard's comments that you're watching the science, but certainly not going to jump on one study such as the Duke study that was pretty limited, very small sample, looked only at one type of theater, So it's not going to make us run and ban gators right away, for example. Not that I'm defending Councilmember Skater specifically. I know how he loves that. But I did want to note, I really agree with Councilmember Rice that we really need to be, I think, much more careful and diligent about aligning with the science our masking requirements, specifically with respect to masks that have one-way valves and face shields as a full mask. For months, the CDC has been just recommending both of those. It's well known that one-way masks allow particulates out that are quite large, that will really not blocking aerosols out. When I'm in the stores, I feel really uncomfortable with those masks. San Francisco banned them around the same time as when our county released its initial revised masking order. The face shields seem to be added in our order as a result of the state changing their requirements. Again, face shields don't block aerosols. So I believe that the county really needs to be much more diligent about specifically looking at face shields as a full covering and looking at those one-way masks with one-way valves. And really disallowing those, except in the case of allowing face shields for, individuals that have certain qualifying conditions. So those are really my only two comments, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to close the public hearing. And next is Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Apologize. It's been quite a morning with technical difficulties. I'm also babysitting my daughter's dog, including a puppy that keeps trying to unearth the potted plant right behind me and eat the jade plant, and it's been interesting. So, just an overall comment. I just think it's just so important to continue to emphasize as we're having these conversations and making these decisions about the executive orders with Dr. Stoddard and Dr. Gills we're also referring to, and it's just kind of like the big picture, right? That, we are trying really hard here in this jurisdiction, not only to follow the science and to make sure that we are allowing what we can, but, the reality is that, and it's sobering. I mean, the reality is that there isn't a very specific roadmap, The truth is that, just as we've seen with other jurisdictions, everybody's doing things a little bit differently. And there are some jurisdictions with very high numbers who don't seem to pay as much attention to a lot of these details. So, I just believe that as we are continuing to monitor what we're doing here in Montgomery County, that we should be, in my opinion, I think we should be grateful that the numbers are where they are because of the decisions that have been made. And it's just not an easy thing. And it's so difficult that we are not able to give a particular timeline. In March, I remember we were talking about, hey, by June we should be okay. We should be opening. And it felt like, what, June? That's insane. But here we are. And again, as difficult as it is so much better for us to continue in our approach and hopefully, be able to mitigate this as much as possible. Because, as Councilmember Rice said, some of us have also gone to some other jurisdictions, and it's just a very different story. So I just wanted to bring that back once again, because we have to look at all of the details and the micro picture, but the macro reality is that Montgomery County has actually positioned itself very well, notwithstanding the fact that we are also trying to balance the economic impact, and that is something that affects all of us. It affects our revenues as well. So just wanted to say that, and again, so appreciative of everyone, including, our public members who are constantly paying attention and reminding us, every day on what should be happening and what is occurring out there in the community. So just really wanted to make that overarching comment and thank all of you for your continued work on all of this.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. Melissa may be off, but I want to thank her personally. She's been amazing. Her work creating masks, being part of the community response with masks, her knowledge has just been inspiring. So, Melissa, thank you for taking the time. I want to go back to the comments. I thought Dr. Gales made some of the most important comments that I've heard in months about the bigger challenge here with education and schools and the lack of clear standards as to what community transmission really is. And I don't think we really were prepared to grapple with that challenge, in the months leading up to where we are now. But going forward, I'm haunted by Dr. Stoddard's comment that if we want to actually reopen MCPS in January, we need to get more of a handle on the virus, and we need to, keep in mind that everything that we're doing has an impact on that. And I always want to be really clear, like I put schools at the top of the list of what I wish could be open. And, everything else comes second to me. And so I'm very concerned about a general trend towards loosening that ends up leaving us without the ability to reopen schools. But the challenge I have is I don't know, as Dr. Gale said, like what is the standard of transmission that allows you to reopen and the kind of gradient of different kinds of reopenings. What that standard might be, I think it's something we have to begin to tackle now publicly, and kind of surface that. It's playing out a little bit in the context of the private school debate, but I think the bigger question is really about the public schools and where do we need to get the virus down to in order to reopen. And I'll say I'll do almost anything that I can to support a path to reopening MCPS. I have been under the impression that the virus is going to rise later this fall. And it's just a general concern, based on my educated layperson's understanding of things, that in October, November, we're going to be experiencing a higher level of transmission than we are today. I'm not making that I'm not a doctor and I'm not a public health expert. It's just my gleaning of information, and that's partly why I have been, reluctantly supporting the continued closure of schools. But having said that, if we need to know where we need to get this virus down to in order to support the reopening of MCPS, I think the Board of Education needs our leadership here, and in order to do that, I think we just have to have a public dialogue about those metrics. And, it comes up like, should we reopen restaurants after 10? That's the super spreader audience. That's the folks gathering at the bars, who are driving, I think, a lot of spread and are very difficult for us to regulate. So, if I would, that's kind of low on my, unfortunately, sadly, it's low on the list to me as far as priorities. If I thought that it didn't matter as far as reopening the schools, but I want us to be on a path to reopen MCPS. So I guess I want to ask Dr. Gales, what's the next step here? How do we proceed over the next month, 2 months to understand what this transmission, what is an acceptable level of transmission to support school reopening? I heard your comments that the CDC has now issued a little more guidance. Harvard has a little bit. They have guidance or recommendations, I should say. Can you talk a little bit more about this challenging issue?
Or if I heard you correctly, there are 3 components, I think, to answer your questions, and hopefully I get them all, and if not, just let me know and we'll circle back. Sure. But to the first question, part of the challenge around getting a handle on community transmission as it relates to schools or any other facility is based upon making sure that we test the relevant folks. So part of the challenge as it relates to understanding what is a safe, effective level for schools to reopen is based upon really understanding the dynamics for kid-to-kid transmission, kid-to-adult transmission. And it wasn't until the last 6 weeks or so that we actually started seeing more kids be tested And a lot of that was informed by the belief that kids, one, didn't transmit, they didn't have develop more significant symptoms. And the science actually came and said that's not really true. Kids can be effective transmitters and can actually transmit, even in our lower ages, transmit as effectively as adults. Now that that new knowledge has popped up, we are starting to see more kids get tested, and we're getting a better sense of what is the true prevalence and incidence of COVID-19 within that age group, because then that will help drive the conversations to determine, well, what is the actual load and burden of the virus that we're introducing into these settings where kids will be. And so as we found out more information with that, that actually gets back to one of the points I made earlier, is that we have to start looking at how our new cases break down by age, as well as the number of new cases when we're talking about test positivity. If we're spreading it out over the general population, that number may be low, but if you break it down by age groups, what is the test positivity for the specific ages? Because that can tell us, one, are we getting adequate tests of that age group, and what is the true number of the burden of the true number of cases to give us a proxy of the burden of virus within those age groups. So I think as we move forward, what's going to be important to help inform that question is making sure that more kids are getting tested, that we're not just dismissing them as saying they don't have it, or even if they're asymptomatic. So getting more kids tested to understand the dynamics within that population, I think will help drive that conversation to be able to get us closer to a number. Now, there are equations out there that do offer guidance and suggest what those numbers should be. Now, we don't necessarily, not we, but not everybody necessarily likes those numbers. So we have, for example, there was a recent study released by the pediatrics policy, the health policy lab at the University of Pennsylvania and the Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania, excuse me, that says that, in fact, in order to safely reopen, you should see an average of 10 cases per 100,000 per week.
Per week, yeah.
Per week.
We're actually below that level now. Right?
No, we're not. So when I'm saying 10 per 100,000, this is for the entire week. For the whole
week. That's our daily. Yeah, I was thinking about daily.
So that's what I'm saying. So that's probably one of the more restricted definitions of safely reopening. Now, you've seen a spectrum of that. I think Connecticut it's based upon 10 cases per 100,000 per day. So there's wide variability within that, and I think that's going to be where we have, as we talk about all these other instances, is what do we think is the safe level to do that? Again, it's a long answer, but
there is no short answer here
within that. And I think that is going to help inform that process to be able to come up with a metric or some semblance of a metric to be able to say, here's a point where we think we can do it. And again, when we had a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the subject, we talked about how there were some other countries that were proxies for that since they had reopened already, and we talked about the levels that they had, and they were closer to that definition of low community transmission as well. So, and the other thing I wanted to highlight within that is, it is a tricky balance. So I wanted to just say, and this isn't specific to your comment, but reframing how we're talking about changing the guidelines around different activities. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's loosening per se. I would say that we have been looking at contact tracing data to say, well, these are certain activities that, particularly that have been done successfully in other jurisdictions that have not been shown to be associated with cases. Yeah. Which has allowed us to revisit where we stand to be consistent with some of those other places. And similarly, when we have received contact tracing information, to your point about, some of the activities related to dining and alcohol, we've gone in the other direction to say, we were shown data to suggest that these activities were tied or affiliated with positive cases. So we put in some restrictions to tighten up on that level.
So it's not loosening, it's allowing activities that are known to be safer.
Or based upon the data that we have.
Based upon data, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah,
please.
I want to add one point, because I think this is super important for everyone to understand, and even the viewing public to understand. It's so
we're making very hard decisions at a local level while recognizing that we are in a much bigger regional, national situation, global for that matter. And we could make decisions to be super restrictive in Montgomery County and open nothing up, and we drive our numbers now down to lower, but not to zero. And that's because we're in a larger society that has made some choices that don't value the public health side. Right. And so we could crush our businesses, close everything down, and not zero out. And so we're making some really hard judgments about what level of risk we find to be acceptable in light of the economic impact and trying to balance all those things out. So that's the hard part about this. Is, well, like, why don't you just close everything down if you really want to open schools? Well, because we wouldn't zero out cases if we did that, because no one else around us is doing that. Yeah. I think we would be pretty supportive of a national strategy that said, let's be really aggressive for these 2 or 3 weeks. Everyone wear masks that has to go out, nothing open that doesn't need to be open, get this virus under control, and then we can all reopen simultaneously. That national conversation is not there, and so we are just struggling with this at a local level, having these sort of Groundhog Day conversations about, what we can reopen safely and what we can't. And that's the really unfortunate thing about the situation we're in. We do not control this at a local level in the way that would get us to this like, we don't have all the the ability to control everything.
It's such an important point. It's so outrageous how the virus deniers, are the ones that are really driving the transmission of this now. And if we had all just gotten together early and supported a strong response, we'd be well through, the hard part, and we would just be into a low level of management. But, there was so much resistance to that. Okay, well, again, thank you. I want to just restate, I think we need to, start having a public conversation about the level of transmission, a goal to reopen the schools, and that will help us as we are seeking over the next month or 3, we're tackling new iterations of all of these regulations to keep our eyes on an important goal, which is to ensure that MCPS can reopen at the very earliest opportunity, and that there's a general public understanding of what that means. I think that people will be more willing to support if they are understanding that there's a strategy here. It's not just endure this as long as you possibly can.
Thank you. And we do have a motion. I have no other speakers. We do have a motion that was made by Councilmember Reamer and seconded by Councilmember Rice. This is the motion for the sitting as the county council, and that is a hand vote. All of those in favor of the resolution to approve the executive order, please raise your hand. And I see everyone. Those opposed, please raise your hand. That carries unanimously. And the next item that we have, which is the council sitting as the Board of Health, we need a motion for that executive order. Who made that one? Councilmember Rice, and seconded by Council Vice President Hucker. And this is a roll call vote. So, Madam Clerk, if you could please call the roll.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Duando?
Yes.
Mr. Duando votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes. Mr. Albornoz?
Yes.
Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. And Mr. Katz?
Yes. And that carries unanimously as well. And with that, we are adjourned for both the council meeting and the Board of Health meeting. Thank you all very much for being with us.